The NBA Draft Combine has arrived, and so has Alex Schiffer to Chicago to watch some 65 hopefuls scrimmage and drill before NBA scouts. Among those attending are Missouri's Jontay Porter, plus Duke's Zion Williamson, Ja Morant of Murray State, Carson Edwards of Purdue. We'll talk about this and some Missouri basketball with a shift man who's posted up in the Windy City. Let's get started on SportsBeat KC, a sports podcast of the Kansas City Star. I'm Blair Kerkhoff. Hey, Alex, how you doing today?
I'm good, Blair. How are you?
Doing fine, man. Tell us where you are and what you're doing there.
I am in the lobby of the Chicago Hilton for the NBA Combine, surrounded by people that make a lot more money than me and are actually somehow taller than me.
I imagine, and you're a pretty tall dude. I mean, you're 6'2"?
6'3", 6'4".
I didn't mean to cheat you like that. Well, 6'3", 6'4". Yeah, I imagine. Even at that, you're probably around a lot of tall people there. So what do you the NBA Combine's a 2-day event. The top prospects in basketball are there. Scouts are there. Coaches are there. What's going to happen the next couple of days?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different tests that they put these guys through, kind of like the 40-yard dash in football. There's some, I forget the exact measurement, but there's kind of like the 40 for the Combine. There's the vertical. All these meetings with teams, and, you know, a lot of the guys that have declared while retaining their eligibility are still, you know, they kind of learn their fate. I feel like this is the make or break week for them, where they discover whether or not it's worth staying in the draft or not. And obviously some of the local guys for Kansas are Devon Dotson and Quentin Grimes hasn't said if he's going to stay in or not, but it appears he will. And Jontay Porter just announced yesterday he's staying in. Right.
And I think Dedrick Lawson is there from Kansas as well. But, you know, and then, like I said, you get the Zion Williamson and Carson Edwards are scheduled to be there. Ja Morant, a lot of the top prospects. I think I counted 66, maybe somewhere in that range of top prospects. Of course, the NBA draft lottery was held the other night with the New Orleans Pelicans with the first pick in the draft. All signs are they're going to take Zion. So yeah, you mentioned Jontay Porter is there. He cannot participate in the workouts because of the second knee surgery he's had in 8 months. But you had a chance to talk to Jontay. What was that about? What did you learn? And how's he doing? What's his recovery stage right now?
Yeah, so, you know, no one's really spoken to Jontay since Mizzou Madness, which was the day before he tore his first ACL for the first time. And a lot of it was just kind of catching up on everything. I learned a lot personally. You know, he talked about with both ACL tears, he felt fine in the immediate aftermath before really feeling pain. He thought he was going to get out unscathed both times. You know, he kind of used the word teased a little bit because he thought, you know, the pain didn't match the injury necessarily when it occurred. And he really thought he'd be able to play. You know, last year, and it kind of was full circle to me, you know, last year at the Combine, Jontay was the one that everyone was talking about as the potential dark horse first-round pick. And now his draft stock is just kind of up in the air. You know, he even says, I don't know where I'll go or how it's going to go down. You know, he's meeting with teams, and he's been trying to be as honest as he can be with the entire situation. I thought it was very insightful as to how the entire thing went for him. You know, he talked about how his brother was the one that's kind of been his big motivating voice throughout the past 8 months for him, and he's just trying to make the most of it. He says, you know, people keep telling me about all the money I blew for going away to coming back to school. You know, I don't regret coming back. You know, his biggest regret is the second ACL tear, which he committed while he was defying doctor's orders. He also, you know, the way we reported the first time about how he tore it, he explained it even better than I thought I wrote it. So it really seemed like a freak thing with the way he explained it.
You know, I think I remember hearing at the time when he tore it for a second time, he was attempting, well, I think it's obvious now, attempting to come back too quickly. It was a big mistake on his part. Did he talk about that?
Yeah, he said he was at the Nuggets practice facility with his brother and his friend, and he said, you know, he was really good with the whole thing about how he said he kind of felt invincible and his knee wasn't bothering him during it, and he just heard a little pop.
So I just kind of hopped in, told them not to play for real defense, and they weren't really, but then I guess just competitive nature took over. I stopped really thinking about my knee and just kind of went for it. I just felt kind of invincible, I guess. I felt like my knee was good, and it felt great. Like, it felt like it was before, but obviously it takes time for those tendons to heal and everything like that. So it wasn't quite cleared for that, but it just felt amazing. So it's a lesson learned. I'm not going to do it again, but yeah, that's basically how it happened.
But he sought multiple doctors' opinions on the second tear, and 2 of them said that he was fine. And then his surgeon said, no, you retore it. So, going back to the whole tease thing, he really felt like both times he kind of, got away with it and played with fire and didn't get burned. And he just said that literally both injuries were a whirlwind because he really thought that he was fine both times, and it cost him his season, obviously.
Yeah. Okay. So what can he do in Chicago since he's not able to work out or scrimmage with the others?
He told me all he can do is meet with teams, and he said, he said last year he could do drills and everything, and he could kind of show what he could do, but he said, his only real weapon is and I don't think weapon's my best choice of word, but is his voice. He said he's been very honest with him about the entire process, and I think, and I'm trying to find someone to maybe talk for this before my story goes, but I think he's in a unique situation also because his game is just so built for the modern NBA. I think if he was a center, like a traditional 5-man or maybe just more of an old school point guard, his draft stock might have gone from first round to potentially undrafted because, he doesn't really have a lot to hang his hat on. But, because he's such a unique breed and so, he can fit with so many different teams, I think that's probably the biggest thing he's got going for him is that, yeah, he's had the injury twice, but at the same time, he still brings so much to the table that, teams probably will still find some place for him in the second round.
Yeah, that's where I have seen him in the mocks, is dropping into the second round. Where before this happened, you were going into the season after last season when he had the all conference year, you saw him as a potential 2019 first round pick. So. Look, I certainly don't blame him for entering the draft. I think this is the right move from a business standpoint for him he's going to have to, he's going to sit out this year anyway. Why not do it on an NBA bench, collecting a paycheck and being rehabbed by the professional team that, that is invested in him. So I think it was the good call. We learned for sure that this was the decision earlier this week. There had been some rumblings among the national media, but Cuonzo Martin confirmed it to you and some other reporters earlier this week in a breakdown of the Tigers, sort of a media availability in May. There was a lot going on there because not only did we learn about confirm the Jontay Porter news, but the Jeremiah Tillman news was confirmed as well. Give me some of the highlights of the conversation that you and others had with Coach Cuonzo Martin the other day.
Yeah, so Jeff Goodman reported yesterday about Jontay staying in the draft, which Cuonzo confirmed, and it was the right decision, not to get too much back to Jontay, but Jontay even told me, I said, if you come back next year, there's a lot to like about this team, and he said, I don't disagree, but, I just think I kind of had to go, and my agent felt the same way. And then, there's kind of an interesting case with him because he declared for the draft, and then he the classmen that were coming out with their press release, and that raised some flags for people. Everyone was like, so what happened? I think at first the thought was, well, maybe the guy just, forgot to put his name in the release, and he was still there. But, Cuonzo essentially said that, and it remains to be seen as to which side screwed up more. I just think that there's blame to go on both sides for this. But it appears that Jeremiah Tillman never formally filed the paperwork to declare for the NBA draft while retaining his eligibility. It seems like he just thought that he said he was declaring and then somebody else took care of the rest. And Cuonzo said he tried for 2 weeks to get him into the process, to get him workouts and everything. And the NBA's got a firm deadline. They let him in. They got to let everybody in that said, maybe some guy from Utah State said, oh, well, they're letting him in. Well, maybe I can give it a shot too and maybe get a couple workouts. So he's definitely coming back. It's huge for Missouri because I don't know what they would have done had he elected to stay in the draft. I think it's a great move for Jeremiah. If he gets the fouls figured out, I think there is a place for him somewhere in the pros. And, with Jontay leaving, Michael Porter Sr. will stay on staff. Cuonzo said he's got 1 year left on his deal. I think something worth watching. Cuonzo said he'll stay on staff. He didn't specify if he will stay as an assistant coach on staff. I think that's something to watch because he could always get reassigned and they give someone else that third assistant spot. And then other little thing is that Ronnie Suggs will transfer. He's going to graduate this weekend. He'll be immediately eligible. Originally committed to Missouri under Frank Haith. Went to the prep school. Frank Haith left for Tulsa. Ronnie Suggs winds up at Bradley. Transfers to Missouri as a walk-on. Got on scholarship last semester. And I just think with that real quick that, he got good minutes for a walk-on. And I think he did enough to maybe say to himself, well, I'm not going to play a lot next year. Maybe I did enough to be a grad transfer somewhere and see a little more playing time my final year at college. He's got a Mizzou degree, so
right.
I don't fault him for that.
So he follows KJ Santos out of the program.
Yes,
players that might have been back but have decided to leave. Hey, let's go back to Tillman just for a second. It just seems so odd and unfortunate for him that this, that it may have come down to a paperwork issue that he's not. That he's not in the NBA draft. Do you think that will affect sort of his approach, his heart and mind as a college player? Will he approach it the way that he needs to improve and to get his stock up a little bit, or will he be bitter and sour about the experience that he just had?
He's a team guy. I think he'll use it the right way. People keep asking me, which way do you point the finger? And I just think it's negligence on Cuonzo's staff's part to think that, and again, I've never played college basketball, but I would think that there would be some kind of orientation you go on with your team to say, if you're going to go pro, here are the steps to do so. If you're going to test the waters, here are the steps to do so. And, I think it was a little short-sighted of Jeremiah to maybe think that all he had to do was send out a tweet or, just
right.
say to the staff that he's going pro. And I think it might have been a little short-sighted on the staff to just think that, as a 19, 20-year-old kid that he understood the process fully, even though he never done it before. So I think there's plenty of blame to go around here with how this all played out. And, I honestly, and I'm not an expert with this stuff, I don't know if he would have gotten invited here, even if he did. I think he would have gotten some workouts with teams for sure that wanted to get an early look at him. But I don't necessarily think that you can say he would have definitely been here. There were guys that I thought would be invited this week that, maybe some smaller conference prospects that had really good years, like former Mizzou guy Jakeenan Gant, who lit up Kansas with Louisiana Lafayette. I thought he'd be a guy that maybe got invited here. And a couple of other guys I was surprised not to see in the list. So, I think it's disappointing a little bit, but I don't know how much he would have been able to get out of it anyway, because, he probably would have gotten some workouts, which would have been good. I didn't really see any lock for him to be here at the Combine.
Gotcha. You're right about. I'm sure there are many disappointed prospects because they didn't get invited to this camp. You may have the list in front of you. I do not. I don't think any of the Kansas State guys got invited to this.
No, I was keeping an eye. No, nope.
No Barry Brown or Dean Wade for the Combine.
Correct.
So, okay. So, in addition to, catching up on Porter and Tillman, it was a good time to think about what the roster might look like for next season. Because this week the news broke of Kobe Brown, right? And the 6'7" small forward signed with A&M, but now he's going to become a Missouri Tiger. What kind of player the Tigers going to get with Kobe Brown?
I'm really curious to see how he fits in with what they have, because I think he's going to be he told me, which I thought, I've never heard this before, that Cuonzo Martin sold him as a combo forward, combo guard type of player. So I think he could play the 1 through 4. I was told that he's about 6'7", 6'8", and he said he can shoot a lot. He averaged his stat line in Alabama, and granted, I think Alabama's known for high school football than hoops, but it was about 24 points per game, 12 rebounds, 8 assists. So I think he brings a lot to the table, and I think he fits in what Cuonzo's doing with a lot of, he wants to do a lot more 4-guard lineups this year and around Tillman. And I think that you're going to see him split some time as a power forward alongside freshman Trey Jackson. I think you'll see him as a 3. I'd be really interested to see if they use Kobe as a 2 or even handle the ball a bit, what that lineup around him looks like. He's 6'7", 6'8". He looks like an offensive lineman. If you look at him in his build, he's got a thick build. And Nicodemus Christopher has a good rapport with guys in the weight room. So I'm really curious to see how they use him, because he seems like a guy that they're going to use all over the floor. He's a really good shooter, so they're going to draw up a lot of set plays to try to get him open. And he's a great passer, so maybe they do some drive and kick, some high-low because he also has a post presence. I think it's going to be very interesting to see what he brings, and not to play devil's advocate, but just to touch on the other side of it. He was on the market very late. He decommitted from Texas A&M. Final four of Penn State, Vanderbilt, Minnesota, Missouri. Very interesting 4 teams. You can make a case maybe Minnesota's the best school in that group. 2 out of the last 3 NCAA tournament appearances, but just interesting kind of him being on the market so late and so highly touted, but the schools that were looking at him. So, I say that because you mentioned KJ Santos, and everyone thought he would be the guy they're kind of selling Kobe Brown as, and he's on his way out. So just covering all the bases.
Right. Well, I think, just from what I've heard about him and what little I've seen, I think he's a rotation guy for sure. And so I look at Missouri's roster, the potential roster for next season, and I'm kind of liking what I'm seeing in terms of some depth. Finally a little bit of depth. They can go maybe 8, 9 now. I see, especially Trey Jackson as a starter, perhaps, from the freshman class. And
I agree.
I just we'll see Drew Smith. I mean, or we've got there's some I think they're going to start with a more talented team than what they finished with last season.
I agree for sure, and I think. There's a couple more guys from the Kim Anderson era that leave, Jordan Geis and Kevin Puryear. I think both had pretty good careers given everything, but it's just 2 more of Konzo's own guys that he can bring in. And he talked about, adding a guy this late. He didn't want to add a guy just to add somebody and use the scholarship. He expects Kobe Brown to contribute given that they're taking a chance on him this late. So I'm really curious to see what it looks like. I think they're going to be a very up and down team next year, in terms of how they get up, how they handle the floor and their style of play. And, if Drew Smith is as good as advertised and Jeremiah Tillman can figure out the fouls, they could be playing in the second weekend of March, I think, depending upon how things go. A lot of SEC teams had coaching turnover, just major turnover in general, like Vanderbilt, Alabama, had both the coaching and player turnover. Obviously, Tennessee loses Admiral Schofield and potentially Grant Williams. I think there's a case for them to finish in the top 4 of the SEC if things go their way.
All right, so let's do it's May 15th. It's about 5 o'clock Central Time. Let's do the May 15th, 5 p.m. starting lineup projection for the Tigers next season.
I was going over this last night. I'm really struggling with this. I think there's so many ways they can go. I think Drew Smith will be the point guard. I think Mark Smith will be the 2. Javon Pickett the 3, Trey Jackson the 4, Jeremiah Tillman the 5. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say I would not be surprised if Xavier Pinson is in that lineup somehow, and they maybe even start a 4-guard lineup with both Smiths, Pinson, and then Jackson Tillman, and they switch out Pickett, or they even go very small around Tillman and go 4 guards, Smith, Pickett, Pinson.
Okay.
So I'm giving a lot of caveats there.
Well, and if they let's stick with the original, with the Smith, and that would bring Torrance Watson off the bench, a nice piece off the bench. They just gave Braun the scholarship this week. Again, I was always worried when the Tigers went to the bench last season. I do think there's there just appears to be a little more quality depth heading into this year.
I agree completely. I think they had maybe 8 guys they could count on at one point last year, and as the injuries racked up, it might have been 7 or 6 towards the end of the year. I think they're very much 9-10 deep this year.
Okay, so what's left in recruiting for Konzo Martin and the staff?
Yeah, I think they're done for 2019. They're going to pocket the 2020 scholarship, which gives them 2 as of right now, potentially a 3rd if Tillman or someone else leaves after next year. The 2 main targets are Caleb Love and Cameron Fletcher out of St. Louis, the 3rd being Josh Christopher out of California, Nicodemus, his cousin. And we'll see what happens with all 3. I think there's a world in which Missouri gets 1 or 2 of them. I don't think they'll bat 1,000 on those 3. But we'll see what happens. I think what would be in Missouri's best interest with some of these guys, and this is out of their hands, some of it, but if those guys elect to wait until next basketball season to sign, and Missouri gets off to a hot start, and we're talking about a top 25 team during the non-conference season, and some of those guys maybe wait till the spring or just later in the year, I think Missouri has a really good chance at them. I think they have a good chance right now, but I think their last year may have hurt them, even though they didn't have Jontay, and that wasn't their fault. But I just think that if Conzo Martin has a chance to show these guys firsthand, this is what one of my teams with all of my guys looks like. This is where I want to go, and this is proof we're having success with it. I think that's his biggest weapon. And again, it's on them to kind of take their time with it. And they're highly talented enough to where some of those schools will wait for them. But, I've kind of said to people that are worried about them losing them to a Kentucky or a Duke, those schools can pick whoever they want to take. It's just as much on the player selling the school as it is the coach. Caleb Love could call Conzo on the first day of class 2020 and they'll find room for him.
Right.
Duke and Krzyzewski, Duke and Calipari, they might let it go to voicemail. They don't have to worry about that stuff. So I think people have to chill out with, I think interest in even a scholarship offer is sometimes overblown with places. Is it a committable offer? That's when it's time to get worried.
Gotcha. Okay, Alex, I think the last time we talked to you, you were in Nashville or had just come back from Nashville and had covered Drew Lock and his draft odyssey that kind of somewhat unexpectedly went into the second day, ends up with the Broncos, and I guess he got his since signing, and he's gone through rookie minicamp, got his uniform number, and he was in the news again. Was it over the weekend or earlier this week when?
Yes.
It wasn't anything he said, but it was the comments of the Broncos starting quarterback Joe Flacco, who essentially said, and I'm paraphrasing, it's not his job to mentor a rookie quarterback, and of course he was referring to Drew Lock, and that I'm sure that comment or sentiment didn't ruffle any feathers anywhere, but it resonated here in Kansas City, certainly because Drew Lock, of course, is a local product, but also it's quite the opposite of what we experienced or what Kansas City Chiefs fans experienced with Alex Smith and Patrick Mahomes. So what was your take on the Flacco Lock situation this week?
Yeah, I had a couple thoughts on it. I don't think Joe Flacco's answer was that bad, honestly. I think he said a lot of right things, honestly. He came in here to win. He came in here to be the starter and play good football. And there's also a guy on staff that's paid specifically to coach quarterbacks. And, one of my buddies was telling me when we were talking about this, he said, is there any position more in sports where, especially in recent years, where, Brian Bowen just walked in, where the starter is expected to mentor the backup more than the quarterback in football. The point guard in basketball or the basketball in general, not really. Baseball, there's so many guys at so many levels of the minors. You don't really see that much. Soccer, not really. So I thought it was a good point that it's almost become an expectation since Patrick Mahomes really took off that if you draft a younger quarterback, the veteran is supposed to take him under his wing. And I think that's a good lesson just in general that maybe I think a lot of teams want to go the Pat Mahomes route. You look at the Giants with Danny Jones. The Jets had Josh McCown for a little bit before giving the reins to Darnold. But I think that it just shows how much of a two-way street this is where the veterans got to buy in and the rookies got to be willing to learn. And, again, I don't think Joe Flacco said anything terrible or incriminating. I don't think it's a ringing endorsement, for him to say at the same time, it didn't sound like he's going to be walking around with his arm over Drew Lock's shoulder.
Right.
But I don't think at base level that he said anything bad. I just think that it was the expectation that he was going to do that because it's a veteran towards the end of the light at the end of the tunnel for him with his career and a younger guy. And, in hindsight, if Drew Lock has a great NFL career and Joe Flacco, he doesn't really give any credit to Joe Flacco for mentoring him, is that going to look much better? I don't know. I think it'd be just as much of a shot as Drew saying, he didn't do anything for me or, it wasn't his job than it would be for Joe to say, it wasn't my job. I don't think Joe Flacco is going to credit Drew, himself if Drew has success long term. And, I think some of this also, I think Pat Mahomes got a lot of Alex Smith, but I think part of his success has also just been the guy's a wizard, or to use Drew's nickname for Mahomes, the sorcerer. So, So I just think it's a two-way street. I think part of it's just the expectation at the position, and I also just think that, a lot of credit goes to the veterans, I think, when it does happen, but I think give the other guys some credit too, because, both Mahomes and Drew had red flags with them or some concerns, at least in general, coming out of college to begin with. So credit to them for kind of addressing them.
Right. Well,
assuming Drew does.
A few things. I don't remember Alex Smith. Maybe I just wasn't there, but I don't remember Alex Smith specifically being asked, are you going to mentor Patrick Mahomes? I think the way it was framed in Kansas City was when after Alex Smith had moved on, that's when it became a story. And it was it was the comments of Andy Reid of Patrick Mahomes who said, Alex Smith did a great job of helping Mahomes along the way, and mostly though it was Mahomes observing Alex Smith as a professional on and off the field. I mean, that's what Patrick Mahomes always said, that he just paid close attention. So if that's what happens, if Drew Lock wants to emulate a Super Bowl winning quarterback, I think that would be a smart move on Drew Lock's part. Just see how a pro approaches it. This is his first experience in an NFL locker room. Joe Flacco's been there for a long time. See how a Super Bowl winning quarterback does it. And I think Flacco probably was put in a little bit of a awkward position. Maybe he wasn't ready to answer the question. And but again, I don't think it made a lot of noise around the country. But you can understand a little bit of sensitivity to it in our neck of the woods here. So.
I agree. I agree.
All right. Look, you get back to work. We hear the commotion behind you. Alex, I really appreciate you taking some time out of your busy day to talk with us about this. Look forward to reading everything you write out of the NBA Combine in Chicago.
Yeah, I just learned that this hotel I'm at is where one of my all-time favorite movies, The Fugitive, was shot. So I have to be on the lookout for the Harrison Ford and the One-Armed Man.
Yes, you do. Absolutely you do. All right, Schiff, take care, buddy.
Awesome.
Links to the stories we discuss can be found in the show notes and on kansascity.com. This has been SportsBeat KC, a sports podcast of the Kansas City Star. I'm Blair Kerkhoff. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back soon to talk Kansas City sports.